Hi and welcome to part 11, where we're going to look at chapter 13 that covers the beast and the famous number 666, or is it 616, as we'll find out. So this chapter is very interesting because being number 13, if the number associating with the cosmos is 12, the light born from that is going to be 13. And when that light is born, of course, whether you want to look at the physical or spiritual qualities of it, because it's a dual object being the union of spirit and energy, when it's born, everything stops for the individual, of course, because you hit t equals 0. And in a very similar sense, this book, Revelations, suddenly kind of stops at chapter 13. It's as if the plot has ground to a halt. Now that the birth of the light has occurred in terms of the seventh trumpet, because we've heard about the birth of the light quite a few times already anyway, right? But it's occurred again, apparently, in the last chapter, where the seventh trumpet went off. Archangel Michael has speared the dragon through the head, obviously. He's vanquished the dragon, and now, all of a sudden, we're hearing about the beast. And what we're really going to hear about here is physical nature as seen from the spiritual point of view, as if the birth of the light in your body has now inculcated this spiritual unified concept to you, the understanding of God, as it were. And now, looking at the rest of your physical nature, you could summarize it and say, oh, look, there's this, there's that. This is what it does. This is how it works. These are the attributes of it. That's basically what we find in chapter 13. It's as if it's a resume on physical nature by itself. Okay, so there's no actual plot movement in chapter 13. It's a stopping, it's a pulling into a lay-by immediately after illumination, thinking, right, what was physical nature again? What's it all about? Oh, right, it's like that and like that, I see. So it's kind of like a re-evaluation. The 13th card of the tarot is Death, partly because the light is the 13th product from the cosmic 12 and represents death for the reincarnating but new life for the ascended in its midst. The Death card represents a new way of life after the death of the old lesser ways and habits, such as one losing one's childhood to adult life, or ascension from the physical world in the extreme, even dying in old age. Any transition, any changeover, when something stops and something else starts, that's the Death card in association. From gestation and birth, life, and ascension to old age and death is a three-stage cycle commemorated by the three stations of the sun at sunrise, high sun, and sunset. Metaphysics becomes aligned and complete by the process of life that sees the death of physical and mental struggles into the birth of divine angels, free from the fetters of the physical prison they were born into. The 13th Hebrew letter is Mem. It has a value of 40, meaning water and Messiah. There are two forms of the Mem, the open Mem and the closed. As the Talmud explains, the open Mem represents the revealed Torah and the closed Mem represents the Torah's secrets. Additionally, the Mem represents the womb, which ends with a closed Mem that represents the 9 months when the womb is closed. The open Mem represents then the period of childbirth when the womb is open. What is the concept of 40? 40 represents a metamorphosis, a transformation, like the Death card. After 40 days, the embryo of a child begins to assume a recognizable form. Metaphorically, water is the womb of creation. The Torah begins, in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth. The next verse states that before God created the heavens and the earth, the Spirit of God hovered over the waters. What waters are these? Since the earth's waters had not yet been created, the waters mentioned here are the womb from which creation emerged, the place of gestation before the world came into existence. That's a zero-dimensional abyss, or the singularity, of which there is only one, by the way. The place where the dead go, and our safety net between incarnations. And the dragon stood on the shore of the sea, and I saw a beast coming out of the sea. He had 10 horns and 7 heads, with 10 crowns on his horns, and on each head a blasphemous name. Well, that pretty much tells you what's going on. There's a little summary of your physical nature in very poignant terms. The C is referring to the navel center in your body, which associates with desire. And of course, that desire is always going to be associating with physical acquisition and this kind of thing. So when it says, I saw a beast coming out of the sea, and it's talking about the dragon standing on the shore of the sea as well. So if we look at the stellar projection of the human psyche, because that's what you've got with constellations designated by people in the past, they don't actually exist like that. There is no Orion man standing there, it's just a collection of stars. But they make sense in the ancient past out of these stars, and drew pictures like a play. So in the stellar projection of the human psyche, just to the right of Taurus and Orion, the beast out of the sea is a sea monster creature constellation called Cetus. Cetus is a sea lion as well, also called the leopard and the sea bear. Notice we're going to hear about a leopard and a bear in a second, who rises from the navel somatic center and is given power at the heart psychic center, that's associating with the lower mind and the best of the intellect by itself without spiritual wisdom. See? So in the stellar projection, we find the Hydra, the constellation that represents the beast later in the drama, because this is quite interchangeable, these associations. At the horizon in the east, as if watching Cetus rising from the western horizon. His 7 heads are the 7 profane sensual desires, the lower profanities of the higher divine desires. His 10 horns are 5 polarized, that's dual, intellectual faculties, associating with the highest of physical nature, crowned with false pride in the powers of the intellect alone. And that means without intuition or spiritual inner guidance, as it were, or philosophic reason above the level of what's obvious. James M. Price explains, as this lower mind is the shadow or the reflected image, so to say, of the true mind, that's the nous, the true mind, which is symbolized as the lion, the beast is pictured as a pseudo-lion, a fake, a pretend in authority, a hybrid, for it resembles the leopard, which was fabled to be a cross between the lion and the panther. It's slow going with the ponderous paws of the bear and has a mouth like a lion, thus simulating the voice of the nous. So that's the voice of the lower mind that's full of self-righteousness. So Revelations 13:2 goes on and says, the beast I saw resembled a leopard but had feet like those of a bear, as we've just explained. We just heard from James there. And a mouth like that of a lion. Yes, a pretend authority, the lower mind. The dragon gave the beast his power, and his throne Well, the dragon is at the navel of associating with desire. So desire and the lower mind are now coming together in a very toxic mix. So the dragon gave the beast his power and his throne and great authority. That's debatable. One of the heads of the beast, here's an interesting sentence, seemed to have had a fatal wound, but the fatal wound had been healed. So according to James, that's James M. Price, the head that had a fatal wound only to be healed is the desire for life on the plane of the senses, that's physical, normal life, a desire which the neophyte must utterly eradicate. And to utterly eradicate any desire for physical existence is a puritanical view that also denies the condition of a returning angel, one who incarnates to show others how to become masters of themselves, and that's the only reason they're incarnating. If we give a fish for a person to eat, they can eat for a day. If we give them a fishing rod, they can feed themselves for life. Engaging in physical life is not sin when we know ourselves. So the lower mind would give you a fish and think that you should be happy with that. Look, I've given you a fish, I've given you something. You should thank me and be happy. Yeah, but it's gone in a day, and the following day you're going to come back for another one. So the fish giver is your master. Right, well, if you speak to the higher mind, it will give you the fishing rod so that you can now go and fish and eat every single day for the rest of your life and feed yourself for life. So there's a difference, there's a distinction between the higher and the lower mind. The higher mind doesn't look for reward or satisfaction. The only satisfaction is that the greater part of being, God is all of us basically, is making its way towards unification again, which is the whole point of manifestation. So an angel sees this higher view, to help somebody without wanting a medal just because they've helped somebody for 5 minutes. But the lower mind wants reward all the time. Well, I helped you, so you owe me now. You see, it's that sort of thing. The lower mind can only perceive the futility of life with its transience, when its transience is extrapolated, leading to poor personal choice and self-destructive tendencies due to the lack of higher-minded or philosophical vision. Inherently rejected as unknowable, but easily understood as the difference between walking while looking at the floor compared with raising your view toward the horizon that goes on and on forever, as it were. That's a metaphor. When the Zen master says, "We'll see," he means all things change and develop continuously if they are manifest, because life just goes on and on, doesn't it? When someone dies, the rest of the world doesn't stop. Well, it does for a minute to mourn, but it carries on. The text carries on and says, the whole world was astonished and followed the beast. Men worshipped the dragon, that's desire, because he had given authority to the beast, that's the lower mind. And they also worshipped the beast and asked, who is like the beast? Who can make war against him? In other words, who can beat this intellectual nonsense effectively? The beast was given a mouth to utter proud words and blasphemies and to exercise his authority for 42 months. There's that number again. Accordingly, 42 months, as opposed to 1260 days, is the first half of initiation, to not talk about initiation, but to talk about the profane nature of the lower mind. Because when you're an initiate, you are still a physical person, supposedly, for apparently the first half of your initiation, where you become more and more noetically guided and less intellectual and self-righteous, but more looking to what's true above your own personal self. As focus on the high philosophical mind takes up more time, the initiate will wrestle with their intensifying psychophrenic mind, the influence of the heart, that's the lower mind, where the beast is identified, learning in effect to gain control of themselves in the process. So you can only gain control of yourself if you have something to wrestle with. You see, it's like the duality thing. You can't have one without the other. You can't have manifestation without death. So you can't have life without death. Do you understand? They're just two sides of the same coin. It does not mean regular physical activity in relationships has no place in life. See, without it, we wouldn't be here to enjoy ascension, would we? People have to have sex. We need relationships. You know, you can't start eradicating everything because you suddenly become puritanical. Therefore, the restrictions placed on initiates is to help focus on the task at hand at the time of commitment. So this can, of course, be done through the normal course of life as well. It simply takes longer. In other words, the text of verse 5 is saying an initiate will still be of a somewhat profane nature during the first half of their standardized initiation into divine philosophy. So really, they're just using that 42 months in the text here to suggest the still physical nature, the profane nature of the lower somatic centers, effectively, that do kick off to some extent because they're always there. Your physical body, when you come back to it after ascension, is still there, and those things are still there. And now they have to reckon with the light. That's the process that comes after illumination, the reckoning with the light and the destruction of these lower mind thinking and the poverty thinking and all this sort of thing. So verse 6 goes on saying, he opened his mouth to blaspheme God and to slander his name and his dwelling place and those who live in heaven. Notice, live in heaven. Those are angels. It's a reference to angels who incarnate on planets while they still live in heaven. There's so much to say about that. You think heaven is a place out there that you go to and stay. Well, what if you incarnate? You think you're away from heaven? No. Right. He was given power to make war against saints and to conquer them. And he was given authority over every tribe, people, language, and nation. All inhabitants of the earth will worship the beast. All whose names have not been written in the book of life belong to the Lamb that was slain from the creation of the world. So non-angels, that's referring to, worship the beast. And what is the beast? It's the lower mind. It's the nature of the physical world and the reasoning and the rationale of that level. The archetype of the creator opening his mouth to blaspheme and slander God's name, see, because the idea that the creator generates the hot and wrathful universe is a blasphemy already against God, because it's physical, whereas God is spiritual. See, it's the opposite. This is only a figure of speech to overemphasize the distinction between the lower and higher ideals. He was given power to make war is simply telling us again how the creative principle, born from ascension, funnily enough, generates a physical system that kills everybody in the end, even saints. So nobody can withstand the beast in these terms. The beast being physical nature, it will kill you. Period. No one can stand against the beast, except the one who conquers death. Angels, in other words, those who ascend and die before they die, so that when they die, they do not die. That's an expression concerning ascension, that you haven't cheated death, you've beaten death. See, the beast and his image are referring to the physical nature of the world and its attraction away from spiritual nature within, because the world is always outside of you, isn't it? It's not inside. Inside of you is very personal, very spiritual. That's where spirituality is, within, not necessarily outside, unless you want to focus on another person. Yeah. But the outside world is energetic. That's the principle there. Those who are ascended know what is good above the obvious physical level. Their names are written in the book of life automatically. It's just a euphemism for being ascended as an angel. They have made the light with God, in other words. Yeah, the slain lamb is the light they made with God, who exists from the creation of the world and lives forever at T equals 0, because it is timeless, so it's forever. He who was the creator and is now the savior, because the creator is redeemed by our activity in life, and we ascend, we turn the creator devil into the savior, son of God. It's the same light, but it's now personalized and not impersonal as the creator. Is to come as the home of angels. Yeah, so he who was the creator and is now the savior is to come as the home of angels. The journey of redemption is suffered through our incarnations throughout the universe, wherever we incarnate onto whatever planet, created by the automatic product of spiritual union, because it's spiritual union that makes the creator of the cosmos. By ascending, we redeem not only the act of creation itself, by closing its loop in ourselves, but the divine child of creation itself, lifting him up as the Son of God, recognizing the higher mind over the lower. Verse 9 goes on saying, he who has an ear, let him hear. That's a reference to having intuition. Verse 10, if anyone is to go into captivity he will go. If anyone is to be killed with the sword he will be killed. This calls for patient endurance and faithfulness on the part of the saints. Well, that is really just simply telling you about how horrible physical life can be, and sometimes, you can fall down a hole. As I said, you can break your leg, or you can have problems with people, etc., etc. It calls for patient endurance, because it's very physical, your experience on the part of the saints. When you realize spiritual nature, physical nature feels like something that's sort of dragging behind you that you want to get rid of. It's a bit like that. So to have an ear is to have intuition. During the tribulation of incarnations, because that's what a great tribulation is, incarnation to do the great work, we will encounter a range of potential experiences, depending on the level of ignorance we find in each case. Our own cravings for the things of physical life, not a problem, by the way. You can't stop that. I know Buddhists say you must eradicate desire, but show me one person who is able to do that. Realistically, you're not expected to be a high-ranking monk overnight. You understand? Our own cravings for the things of physical life is what brings us to its yoke. Where we suffer its automatic washing machine effect of throwing back at us what we put into it. It tends to. Remain faithful to understanding and truth, and we will make it home, no problem. If we, on the other hand, let it get to us, we will create more karma for ourselves that requires more incarnations to work through and release due to the generated unconscious content. So that's an issue there, how you deal with your unconscious. When we know and see the distinction between the constant, robust and eternal nature of spirit and the transient nature of the universe in contrast, it becomes easier to ride it. These testing experiences, it's much easier. When you know what's what, testing experiences become trifling, literally trifling. More so because the distance of one's vision sees for miles with spiritual wisdom. Oh yeah, it does. Far outstripping the shallow view of the physical world and its dead-end views associating with the lower mind. Verse 11, now we're going to hear about a beast coming from the earth. So previously it was a beast from the sea. There's desire coming up to the lower mind, connecting with the lower mind. And now we have, in verse 11, then I saw another beast coming out of the earth. That's the lowest body center now, where sensuality exists. Yes, your creative functions are there, physical. But he spoke like a dragon. He spoke with desire. He exercised all the authority of the first beast on his behalf and made the earth and its inhabitants worship the first beast, whose fatal wound had been healed. So another beast coming from the earth is the pseudo-lamb, because it's the opposite. If the lamb is born here, the opposite is going to be the pretend lamb, as it were, or the opposite reflection, like Harry Potter is up here and Voldemort's down there, as it were, the worst of the worst. As the pseudo-lamb coming from the lowest, most physical, creative, somatic center, the element earth, as carnal love instead of divine love, in forms such as unbalanced sentiment. How interesting. Emotional impulses without thought, and irrational religious zeal. As a dual principle, He had two horns like a lamb and spoke like the dragon. The same source of uninspired, traditional, dogmatic religious convention you'd associate with the lower mind that's very self-righteous and wants to harm everyone who disagrees. See? As a constellation near Aries and Taurus, sometimes pictured with two horns, Medusa. Medusa, the lady with the snakes for hair. And the body of a snake. I think she has a bow and she kills people like that. She doesn't need one. In fact, all she has to do is look at them and you turn to stone. So that's really, you can see the euphemism there of becoming ascended and seeing the Creator or seeing the Son of God with beams of light coming out of it as if they're all serpents. The Creator, devil aspect of that light, Creator of the universe, is associating with Medusa. So when you see the Creator, T is at zero, everything stops, isn't it? As if you've turned to stone. So there's a euphemism for her characteristic there in terms of ascension and her association with the created devil. She is a Gorgon whose head was cut off by Perseus in the famous Greek myth and still turns all to stone even though it's been severed from his body. It's also referred to as Satan's head. One of the more fantastical, unrealistic magical powers associated with Medusa was bringing fire down from heaven. The pseudo-lamb, that's at the lowest somatic center, metaphorically draws fire down from the sky of the highest somatic center in its own intellectual limitations. So it's trying to use the noetics of the brain, as it were, down here with its lower thinking in these terms. That manifests as all kinds of unbalanced disorders. Understanding truth takes for experiencing it point blank in ourselves, and that is done in silence when all the mind's chatter has ceased. Verse 13 goes on and says, and he performed great miraculous signs, even causing fire to come down from heaven to earth in full view of men. Because of the signs he was given power to do on behalf of the first beast, he deceived the inhabitants of the earth. He ordered them to set up an image in honor of the beast who was wounded by the sword and yet lived. The signs he was given power to do is a fallacy that creation is ultimate reality. And the highest level of intellectual achievement is the lower mind, which is a self-righteous little prick. Excuse my French. The inhabitants of the earth, or universe, generally speaking, anyone who finds themselves in life, are initially deceived by physical nature into thinking there is nothing else, as if spirituality has no place. Again, it mentions being wounded by the sword and yet lived. You can also take that. Once you ascend, you basically destroy the devil, as it were, with the truth. Ascending means finding the truth, and the truth is symbolized by a sword. So it's as if you're shoving a sword in the devil's face when you ascend. You beat him. So that's a fatal wound, and yet he still manifests. You see, it doesn't make any difference to that. So it's a fatal wound that has healed and become physical nature in these terms, in this interpretation. Verse 15 goes on saying, he was given power to give breath to the image of the first beast, so that it could speak and cause all who refused to worship the image to be killed. He also forced everyone, small and great, rich and poor, free and slave, to receive a mark on his right hand or his forehead, so that no one could buy or sell unless he had the mark, which is the name of the beast or the number of his name. Right, well, there's a link under this video to another video by Jonathan Pageau, who is one of the best speakers, I think, on Christianity in the world today. He's a prolific YouTuber and well worth watching. I strongly recommend him, so I'll put a link down to a video he calls the Mark of Cain, where he talks about exactly what I'm talking about now. He basically reiterates the fact that the mark of Cain, or the mark of death, is a physical body. It's physical life itself. It's just ordinary physical life. There's nothing extra special about it. So you are marked for death. Unless you meet God, you are marked for death. You have the mark of Cain. You are using your lower mind mostly, supposedly, or these sorts of things. So those who do not carry the superstitions of the lower mind, the one that judges without making sure of facts, that is, the lower mind, are often persecuted by those around them that discover their different point of view. His power is to give breath to the image of the first beast, the humanoid being, who speaks blasphemies and causes the death of others who disagree with their politic if you apply it to the general human. War is normal on Earth, for instance, due to human nature lacking depth, compassion, and understanding. No one can operate on a planet in the cosmos without occupying a transient physical body marked for death. They cannot engage in the usual custom of trading with other demons, or humanoids. Before you ascend, you're referred to as a demon. I don't know whether anyone knew that. We're all born demons, I'm afraid. And when we don't ascend and we hang around in the netherworld and start appearing to people in physical life before incarnating again, perhaps, and they're all demons as well. See, anyone who's not an angel is a demon. I think that's where the title angels and demons comes from. There is nothing else. It's like Jews and Gentiles. It's the same sort of thing. They cannot engage in the usual custom of trading with other demons, humanoids, without a body, for obvious reasons, because you can't engage in life without a physical body. This verse, then, is a simple statement about ordinary life. Until we find our own redemption and ascend our bit of the cosmos, that's our own physical body, the highest physical nature has to offer is the lower mind, which in Greek is the expression he phren, whose gematria adds up to 666. So verse 18 states, this calls for wisdom. If anyone has insight, that means ascended or illuminated, let him calculate the number of the beast, for it is man's number. His number is 666. One important point made by Elaine Pagels, who is the professor of Gnostic studies at Princeton University, as many other scholars support, is that a portion of Revelations, if not all, might be taken as historical and may fit the first century the book was written in. For instance, the Emperor Nero is said to be the source and personification of the beast, whose number is 666. The letters in the emperor's name add up to 666 when added using the simple system of gematria. Well, that's only going to work if you want to use somebody that everyone knows about at the time you write the piece. If it was written in the first century and you want to personify the beast-like nature, you could suggest that a certain famous person, so it's going to be an emperor everyone knows about, who was the worst emperor, let's say, and Nero apparently had the worst reputation for being the biggest sadist and bastard, whatever you want to call him, the nastiest piece of work you can imagine as an emperor. So it's thought that John used him as a personification, and it's simply the addition of the numbers of the letters in his name, but that doesn't work. It doesn't work for a very specific reason. And in verse 18, it does say this calls for wisdom, so you can't be blasé about it. Let him calculate the number of the beast, for it is man's number. It doesn't say it is a specific man's number. It says it's the number of mankind. That's very different to identifying somebody called Nero as the beast. It has nothing to do with the Emperor Nero, I'm afraid. This 666 has nothing to do with him whatsoever. If you want to personify beast-like qualities in a human, you can identify Nero if you like, that's okay. But to say and suggest that that is who is being spoken of in this text is quite ridiculous, actually, including the 616, which is the number involved in the earlier version of Revelations, apparently. This contention is further supported by an older and singular version of Revelations that we're dealing with the Emperor Nero, which states that the number of the beast is 616 instead. The Emperor Nero's name, taken with or without a certain letter, add up using gematria to 616 and 666 respectively. So it's thought that that's a solution to why the earlier version of Revelations was 616 and not 666. This is one of the main arguments to support an historical and prophetic interpretation of Revelations, containing it to the 1st century AD and the Roman occupation of the Holy Land. In the 1st century AD, it was common practice, to the point of mimicking today's graffiti, to account for a characteristic by using the gematria of the name of the person in question. This accounts for the use of 666 or 616 as the name of a person who personifies the most beast-like characteristics, and the Emperor Nero certainly fits the bill at the time of the writing of Revelations. However, the text does not state the number is attributed to any person in a historical sense, but the human body itself, for it is man's number. In fact, there are many and various methods of acquiring the number 666 from all sorts of sources, such as Vicarius Filii Dei, which means Vicar of Christ. The gematria of that expression adds up to 666 as well, as an example. Another example is this fallacy that the Book of Revelations is talking about barcodes, because a barcode, have a look at a barcode, there's one, see. Can you see that? Yeah, there's the barcode down here. This one here. The two lines at the end, on either end, and the two lines in the middle that jut down, those two lines represent the number 6. So every single barcode in existence contains 666. And that is a reason that people use to suggest that the Book of Revelations was written to account for the future somehow, when that is utterly ridiculous. that means absolutely nothing. Just because you buy and sell things with barcodes, people associate that with the phrase of buying and selling, but that's nothing more than a figure of speech to talk about what people do in general, and that is they trade with each other. In the old world, you'd give, I don't know, 50 camels for a woman or something, you know, or 100 camels for a plot of land and all this sort of thing, trading, bartering, that kind of thing. It's only in modern age we have banks and the modern financial system. So we've kind of lost touch with that sort of mentality, if you like. But that's all it's talking about. It's literally just delineating normal everyday life. The fact that it's physical and it's based in the lower mind. It's not exactly the heights of godlike understanding. It doesn't look like that in the world. So numbers represent the archetype of existence and manifestation, as we find with mathematics and physics, etc., and science. It uses mathematics, applicable to both the physical, tangible world and the invisible, intellectual world of philosophy. For instance, the number 9 refers to consciousness, apparently, or spirit, truth. As mentioned before, it's the number of truth. And can be derived any number of ways using gematria, such as if you take the 666 and you add the 6's together, you get 18, and if you add the 1 and the 8, you get 9. So that number adds up to 9 using gematria on the already used gematria, because this is a second level of use of gematria now. Yeah, because 666 is derived using gematria already. Likewise, the number 144,000 or 144, using gematria on that, they add up to 9. 1 plus 4 plus 4 is 9. And yet 144 refers to the higher mind. So 666 and 144 both add up to 9. And yet 666 is the lower mind and 144 refers to the higher mind more. In this context, the gematria of some numbers in Revelations may be stated as effectively highlighting the nature of consciousness and how it can transform from human to angel. That's fair enough. This, however, means using gematria on the resultant numbers of 666 or 616, not in their derivation. And not all numbers in Revelations add to 9. In the Greek mysteries, like 7,000 for instance, 7,000 people die in an earthquake at one point. That's not 9. In the Greek mysteries, every aspect of the self associated with the chakras has an associated gematria, starting with the conqueror, which is Ho Nikon in Greek, and that adds to 1,000. The gematria of that expression adds to 1,000. Intuitively wise is epistemon, and that's 999. The higher mind is Iesus, which adds up to 888. I think you're starting to see a pattern here. The cross, or Storos, is 777, using gematria on that expression. The lower mind, which is Hey Fren, adds up to 666. Desire, or epithumia, is 555. The serpent coil, or spirima, is 444. Incontinence, which is akrasia, and licentiousness, which is aqualacia, are both 333. Interestingly, if we remove the last letter, N, which has a value of 50 in gematria, from the expression Hey Fren, representing the fish, in fact, because N means Nun, which means fish, which is what John becomes in the abyss, and he's facing the light, which is the Redeemer, Creator at once. Obviously, technically, when you see it, it's the Son of God, but we can also take it to be the Creator, figuratively. So if John is a fish, and that light represents the epitome of the lower mind in terms of being the Creator only, if we remove John and just isolate the Creator by itself, using the expression Hey Fren, removing the N, which has a value of 50, we are left with 616. To refer to the light as Creator. I find that quite interesting because it's very simple. Yes, it destroys the word, the expression Hey Fren. If you remove the N, it's Hey Frey, which probably doesn't mean anything, I would have thought. But it's a little bit of trickery. This kind of trickery always goes on with the Judaic system and the Kabbalistic system. There's lots of this sort of thing going on. Tricks of words and numbers and sleight of hand and all this sort of thing. You know, you need to be very clever to keep up with it sometimes. The number 6 by itself represents the highest of physical nature, just below 7, which is more spiritual apparently. Just before spiritual nature takes over with the completeness of 7. 6 is the number of steps on the tree of life before the 7th and God reunification. 6 is the number of kingdoms made by the single created devil, whose best creation is the 6th kingdom, the humanoid being. Comparing the two reflected worlds of the individual to the cosmos that made them, the evil nature of 666 is everything that is physical, i.e. not spiritual, and may be derived considering the reverse sense of unifying spirit's 3 aspects with the energy of 6 kingdoms of the creative principle as the beast alone without the lamb of salvation. So if you just ignore ascension and just look at the physical nature of creation with the Creator by itself, all of that can be thought of as evil in a way. As a result, instead of the spiritual 111 or 1000 of the conqueror of God or associating with God, we have the physical 666 of mankind under the beast. Early pagans, like Pythagoras, used geometric symbols and mathematical codes to record their knowledge and ideas. One of those is a magic square. It's a magic square of the sun, which has a 6x6 grid going back in antiquity to the Middle East. The rows, columns, and diagonals of this matrix add up to 111, but there are 6 of them, so when you add those together, you get 666. "111", you see, is a way of referring to metaphysics, but the exact opposite of that is what's physical. So 666 is 3 times 6, the physical number as well. We can look at it in those terms as well, as if the 6s are individuals, and they kind of represent the worst of or the greatest, if you like, of what is physical. Thank you very much for listening to that expose of what is physical. In chapter 14, we're going to go straight back up to what is spiritual with the Lamb, and once again, the 144,000 are emphasized at chapter 14 at the end of Act 2, just as we found at the end of Act 1 in chapter 7 when the 144,000 sealed. So I'll see you then. Take care of yourself.